If it's Friday, the fight over free speech heats up following Charlie Kirk's assassination. I just spoke to Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. We'll bring you a first look at that exclusive interview with his reaction to the president suggesting the FCC could take away broadcasters' licenses for what he sees as negative coverage. Plus, former Vice President Harris reignites divisions in the Democratic Party as several high-profile Democrats and potential 2028 contenders respond to being criticized by name in her new book about last year's failed campaign. And Congress careens towards a government shutdown as separate plans pushed by Republicans and by Democrats both fail in the Senate, and lawmakers head home without a strategy in place to avoid a shutdown at the end of the month. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I am Kristen Welker in Philadelphia. Right now, American leaders, both political and cultural, are navigating a complicated and fraught moment following Charlie Kirk's assassination, as President Trump blames his rivals for the tragedy and his administration tests how far it can go to crack down on dissent. It's forcing Republicans to grapple with how far they're willing to go to support free speech, and Democrats to grapple with how far they're willing to go to respond. It comes as the backlash grows following ABC's suspension of late-night host Jimmy Kimmel over comments accusing Republicans of playing politics with Charlie Kirk's assassination. Kimmel's supporters saying ABC's parent company caved to political pressure from the FCC chief Brendan Carr, who had threatened to revoke affiliates' licenses over Kimmel's remarks. President Trump then threatened further action, suggesting he'd punish TV networks that air unfavorable coverage of him. Listen.
Well, you know, when a late-night host is on network television, there is a licensing. I'll give you an example. I read someplace that the networks were 97% against me. I get 97% negative, and yet I won easily. I won all 7 swing states, popular, won everything. And if they're 97% against, they give me only bad publicity or press. I mean, they're getting a license. I would think maybe their license should be taken away. It will be up to Brendan Carr.
Now, Earlier today, I spoke exclusively with Pennsylvania's Democratic Governor Josh Shapiro, who was himself a victim of political violence earlier this year when an arsonist firebombed his residence with his family inside. Here is a first look at part of our conversation. Free speech and speech has been in the spotlight this week after the news that ABC pulled Jimmy Kimmel, comedian, off the air after comments that he made on his late-night show. What was your reaction to learning that he'd been pulled off the air?
Fear, just worry for our country. Our foundational principle in this country, which has roots in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, when William Penn settled here in the 1680s, is about freedom of expression, freedom of speech. And to see that being undermined by the long arm of the federal government is extremely dangerous. Again, whether you agree with Jimmy Kimmel or not, whether you found him funny or not, to fire someone because he told a joke about the president repeatedly and the president didn't like it, to fire him because he was inartful in his words in the wake of the killing of Charlie Kirk, when you have others in the media, and I mean this is no disrespect, who are inartful every day, right? That is dangerous when we are selectively firing people because of their viewpoints.
I want to be very clear about what you are saying. Do you believe that President Trump and the Trump administration is trying to stifle dissent and people who would disagree?
Question. Pardon me. Without question. Yeah. They're trying to stifle dissent. The president, in his own words, I think it was aboard Air Force One a couple nights ago, made clear he wants to look at the licenses and the certifications for particular media outlets if all they're doing is attacking Trump. I mean, Listen, the bedrock of our free society is the freedom of speech. The freedom for someone like you to ask me questions and opine about my work, whether I agree with you or not, whether I like what you report or not. You've got the freedom and the right to be able to do that. And that is something that protects all of us, all of us. And it is dangerous what this president is engaged in.
Now, you can watch much more of that conversation this Sunday only on Meet the Press. Now, we should note Democrats have also had their own inter-party disagreements about the limits of free speech and censorship, especially when it comes to speech on college campuses. But the White House's actions and threats are what is driving the current debate. And Democrats on Capitol Hill have been near universal in their condemnation. Republicans have been more divided. Texas Senator Ted Cruz, the chairman of the Senate committee in charge of the FCC, had pretty strong words of warning on his podcast today.
I think it is unbelievably dangerous for government to put itself in the position of saying, we're going to decide what speech we like and what we don't, and we're going to threaten to take you off air if we don't like what you're saying. And it might feel good right now to threaten Jimmy Kimmel.
Yeah.
But when it is used to silence every conservative in America, we will regret it. And so, again, I like Brendan Carr, but we should not be in this business. We should denounce it. It's fine to say what Jimmy Kimmel said was deplorable, it was disgraceful, and he should be off air, but we shouldn't be threatening government power to force him off air. That's a real mistake.
Now, Republican Senator Cynthia Lummis striking a different tone, telling Semaphore this, quote, under normal times, in normal circumstances, I tend to think that the First Amendment should always be sort of the ultimate right and that there should be almost no checks and balances on it. I don't feel that way anymore. And with that, I am joined now by NBC News White House correspondent Yamiche Alcindor, NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Melanie Zanona, and Ty Cobb, who served as a White House attorney during the first Trump administration. He's also a former assistant U.S. attorney. Thanks to all of you for starting us off. Ty, thanks to you for being here. I am going to get to you in just a moment, Ty. I do want to start with Yamiche, though, who is at the White House. Yamiche, take us inside the conversations that you are having with sources there. Is there any concern about the pushback that you are seeing from the likes of Senator Ted Cruz, from other conservatives who are now expressing concerns about free speech?
As of now, in my conversations with White House officials, I have not sensed that they feel as though they're going to have a wave of pushback to these actions by President Trump. They really feel like they have the wind at their backs and that this sad, sad tragedy involving Charlie Kirk has really, in some ways, emboldened them to make the case that there are people in this country that don't deserve to be on television and should, in some cases, have their license taken away when it comes to different networks. The president himself was very clear. He said on Air Force One there, I know you played part of it, he says, I essentially won the popular vote, have the support of the American people, the majority of the American people. And as a result, he believes that when he sees things on networks that are negative about him, that are majority negative about him, that is somehow not the will of the people and not in the public interest. And as a result, he feels like he can go after networks. How far this goes is a big question here. You also, of course, mentioned that Ted Cruz, there's also Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina, Ted Cruz, of course, being from Texas. They have been pushing back, saying that this is not what they want to see the Trump administration doing. But I just don't know how much weight those senators have in a White House where the president feels like he has the popularity of his party.
Well, you know, Yamiche, President Trump has said that he plans to speak at Charlie Kirk's funeral on Sunday. What are you hearing about what we might hear from him, what his remarks might be focused on Sunday, obviously paying tribute to Charlie Kirk?
We certainly expect him to pay tribute to Charlie Kirk. The White House hasn't put out a certain preview of his statements, but we can gather just by what the president has said in this tragedy and the way that his administration has been so personally connected to Charlie Kirk throughout the years, that he is going to be talking about Charlie Kirk as someone who they saw as a hero of the conservative movement. He has said multiple times that Charlie Kirk is someone that he credits for helping him win his way back to the White House, that he was incredibly talented in his mind, in the president's president's mind with convincing young conservatives to really get excited about elections. And of course, we expect a sort of personal touch because the president's son, Donald Trump Jr., has said that for at least the last 10 years, he spoke to Charlie Kirk almost every single day. So you can imagine that the president has said that he sees Charlie Kirk as a sort of son to him. So you can imagine that there's also going to be not just the politics, but the personal here, Kristen.
And Yamiche, we should note as we're having this conversation, we anticipate President Trump might be making some remarks, signing some executive actions in the Oval Office. So we will take folks to that event once it does begin. But Melanie, let me get to you before we get to Ty. Talk a little bit about the divide that we're seeing, the reaction on Capitol Hill amongst Republicans.
Yeah, well, there are some cracks in the GOP over this issue, and I do think it poses an identity test for Republicans who have long prided themselves on being the champions of free speech. Now, most Republicans, of course, are lining up to defend the Trump administration. Most of the Republicans that I talked to over the past few days, including the leadership, have really chalked this up as to just a private business making a business decision based on their own standards, despite the fact, of course, that the FCC did pressure and threaten the company to make this move. Or in some cases, Republicans have tried to point the finger at Democrats and call them hypocritical for pushing to deplatform President Trump, for example, back after the January 6th insurrection. But there have been some notable Republicans who have been speaking out and expressing real concern about the government intervention here. Ted Cruz, for example, he's one of Trump's strongest allies on Capitol Hill. So it was kind of surprising almost to hear him on his podcast this morning saying that while he completely disagrees with what Kimmel said, he also believes that it's dangerous territory to allow the government to start dictating what should be on the airwaves. And he warned that Republicans aren't going to like it very much when the tables are eventually turned. And I do think, Kristen, privately, that is a fear shared by many other Republicans beyond Ted Cruz. Just few of them are willing to say that out loud right now.
Mel, stand by for us. I want to talk to you about the possibility that the government could shut down. I want to turn to Ty Cobb, though, on this topic. Ty, I want to start off by just, as someone who is a student of the law, someone who is steeped in the law, get your reaction to hearing that ABC had indefinitely suspended Jimmy Kimmel.
Well, I think, Kristen, that it's evocative of what we've seen throughout history. I mean, in 1939, Dr. Goebbels, at Hitler's instruction, removed 5 comedians, or wittices, as they were called at the time, from the airways in Germany, and for criticizing or making fun of the government in a satire way. Putin, when he took over in the early 2000s, one of the first things he did was systematically silence critical media outlets, and independent TV channels were bought out or shut down. Trump is waging war on people who offend him. He's all about vengeance. And sadly, his subordinates, like one of the Project 2025 authors, Brandon Carr of the FCC, are following in line. And, perhaps the Presidential Crimes Commission that Representative Swalwell called for recently can consider this at the end of this administration. But these people are, abandoning our constitutional rights and our constitutional freedoms. Even Senator Loomis today, by saying, she doesn't feel like enforcing the First Amendment at this point, despite having, liked it when it suited her. That's a violation of her oath of office, where she takes an oath to preserve and protect the Constitution. So I think this is really tragic. And I think, as Carr said yesterday, there will be more shoes to drop. I think we can count on that. This will be 3.5 more years of vengeance. Well,
that's a pretty dire picture you're painting, Ty. And I guess my question for you is, do you see any guardrails? Is there anything at this point that could prevent the FCC from cracking down on other media outlets, as you heard President Trump warn could happen? How do you see this?
So I think let's take the president's statement about revoking the licenses to the networks. There are no licenses to the networks. That's how little he knows about the way the government works. But I think you'll see the FCC cracking down. I think you'll see more threats of the type that they've used successfully. I mean, pretty soon the only comedian left standing is going to be Caroline Levitt. I think it's really difficult in a country where the founders created three branches of government, all of whom have an obligation to try to prevent the others, from getting out of bounds. We've got a situation now where Congress has neutered itself through its cowardice, and the only bar to Trump's authoritarian instincts is the courts, and the courts are always going to be a little bit behind because that's the way they're structured, and it may not be enough.
Ty, I had that opportunity to speak with Governor Shapiro earlier today, and one of the points that he made was in previous comments, whether it be the vice president or President Trump in his second inaugural address, talked about the need to protect the First Amendment, talked about the need to stomp out so-called cancel culture. And this really flies in the face of that. You have worked with President Trump based on your interactions with him. How do you think he views, at the time that you worked with him, these protections? Is there a shift going on, or has this always been his perspective?
No, I think consistency is not something that President Trump is known for, and he always favors whatever enriches him or flatters him. And in this circumstance, he's greatly enriched if he can silence his critics because he has free reign at that stage of the game. So I don't believe that this is in any way philosophical. This is all about his interest in power and domination.
Do you think, Ty, that the company is actually headed toward a constitutional crisis?
I think we're there. I think we've been
You think
there.
the country is headed toward a constitutional crisis? Sorry.
Yes, I think we're already there.
And what are you going to be watching for? Do you have any optimism that the country will find its way through this moment in a way that allows it to be stronger than before, as quite frankly, history has told us it has done so many times in the past?
I hope that's the case. I think it will take at least a generation for the country to regain the freedoms that we enjoyed 9 months ago.
A generation, Ty.
Yes.
That's pretty stark.
You have a lot of MAGA people in Congress. You have a lot of MAGA judges. You have a lot of appointees. Trump is populating what he calls the deep state with loyalists as opposed to qualified people. It's going to take some time to root that out and get back to a situation where we had aspirational, virtuous, intelligent people in those jobs.
How do you see the constitutional crisis playing out, Ty? And you say we're already there. What makes you feel confident that the country's already in a constitutional crisis?
Well, I think that the abdication of Congress of any role or responsibility in what's going on in America, other than to rubber stamp the president's authoritarian efforts, I think that is devastating to the country and clearly raises constitutional concerns that the founders hadn't contemplated. I think the founders assumed that people who took an oath of office to preserve and protect the Constitution would actually do so, as opposed to flounder like they are now.
Ty, you and I talked a lot during the first Trump administration when you served the president then, and you always made it very clear you were serving the office of the presidency. Do you have any regrets about your time there?
No, I don't have any regrets about my time there. As you know, I'm the oldest of 8 kids from a small town in Kansas, and my dad was a naval fighter pilot. I always believed if the president asked you to serve, you served. I think bad presidents deserve more help, frankly, than good presidents, because it's difficult to populate those offices, as we're now seeing. It was difficult. But I was proud to serve and proud to serve my country.
Ty Cobb, as always, your perspective is so meaningful, and we really appreciate your joining us today to give us your insights.
Thank you, Kristen. Great to be with you.
Always great to have you, Ty. Please come back soon. Mel, let me go back to you on Capitol Hill, because you are watching a crisis of a very different kind. The Senate just voted to basically block proposals from both parties that would keep the government open. As I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, the key sticking points are opposition to cuts to Medicare, and of course they want subsidies to be included for Obamacare. What is going to happen now? Is the government going to shut down? And did I miss anything?
That's a great question, Kristen. I'm not sure that the leadership actually even knows the answer to that question. They are barreling towards a shutdown with no off-ramp in sight at the moment. And that's really for two reasons. One, logistics. Both chambers are going to be out of session next week for the Jewish holiday. And the House even just decided that they're not going to come back until after the government funding deadline. So in some ways, just conceding that there's going to be a shutdown of some length. And number two, politics. Democrats feel completely comfortable voting against these Republican proposals to keep the government open. They want to stand up to Trump, while Republicans feel confident that Democrats are ultimately going to get the blame for a shutdown. So that's where we're at. Of course, things can change pretty quickly here on Capitol Hill, but something is going to have to change over the next week or so in order to actually avoid a shutdown, Kristen.
All right, Mel Zanona covering a lot of ground for us on this Friday afternoon. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much. And coming up, former Vice President Kamala Harris names names in her new book about her sprint-like campaign for president, criticizing several high-profile Democrats who are now potential 2028 contenders. We will dig into the revelations and the reactions. Plus, Health Secretary Kennedy's hand-picked vaccine advisory committee just declined to recommend the COVID vaccine in what could be the start of a major overhaul of vaccine policy in America. We'll be right back with more Meet the Press Now. Stay with us. Welcome back. Former Vice President Harris doesn't seem to be pulling any punches in her new book, even if that means igniting tensions within the Democratic Party. In the book, which is set to come out later this month, the former vice president gives an inside look at her breakneck campaign, including her thinking when it comes to choosing a running mate. According to The Atlantic, she writes, quote, former Treasury Secretary Buttigieg would have been an ideal partner if I were a straight white man. She goes on to write, quote, part of me wanted to say, screw it, let's just do it. But knowing what was at stake, it was too big of a risk. And I think Pete also knew that, to our mutual sadness. Meanwhile, the New York Times reports former Vice President Harris viewed Pennsylvania Governor Shapiro as more interested in defining the role of VP for himself than helping her win. Joining me now to discuss all of this is my panel, Ashley Etienne, former communications director for Vice President Harris and former senior advisor to Speaker Nancy Pelosi. And also with me is Republican strategist Rick Tyler. Thanks to both of you for being here. I do want to delve into former Vice President Kamala Harris's book momentarily. But first, I have to get both of your reactions to something we just heard. Ashley, let me start with you. Ty Cobb just says he believes the country is already in a constitutional crisis. Do you agree with him? What do you make of what you just heard?
No, I absolutely agree with him, especially as it relates to this issue of the hostile takeover of the media. I mean, it's sort of greed and corruption and Trump's insatiable appetite for power at play on full display in the country. And really, it's an example of how our rights are being trampled because of it. You know, this will be his greatest legacy. It won't be some innovative policy to make us more competitive in the world. It'll be all of his efforts to undermine the truth, undermine these pillars of our democratic system, and really undermining and attacking his opposition.
Well, Rick, how do you see it? Do you think that is overstated to hear Ty Cobb and now Ashley agree that the country's already in a constitutional crisis?
I don't know that it's in a constitutional crisis. I know that the Constitution is being tested, and it's been tested for all these hundreds of years. It is definitely being tested now, and we will see if the courts and the co-equal branches of the government push back on some of the powers that the president has usurped for himself. And so that goes on tariffs, certainly goes on the board of governors for the Fed. It goes for firing employees. So all these things I think still need to be adjudicated. And when the court begins to agree or take positions against the Constitution, then I think I would agree with that we're in a constitutional crisis.
Okay, well, it certainly is something we're going to continue to watch very closely. I do now want to get to 107 Days, this book out by former Vice President Kamala Harris telling her side of the story, actually basically saying there wasn't enough time for her to win the election. She says that it was reckless for President Biden's inner circle to leave the final decision up to him. And now this sort of extraordinary take on her process of choosing a running mate. She says she didn't choose Buttigieg because she thought there was basically too much diversity on the ticket if she were to have chosen him. Governor Josh Shapiro, she talks about him being more focused on actually getting the job than actually being her partner if she were to have chosen him. What do you make of this account? And by the way, I will have his reaction coming up on Meet the Press on Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I love the vice president. I think she's a blueprint for the vice presidency. I think she's, again, brilliant, superb, is, a groundbreaking in every aspect of her entire career. But I just don't know what value that this adds in this moment right now when we're fast tracking toward a dictatorship. You've got 300,000 plus Black women that have dropped out of the economy. The economy's tanking, record unemployment. So I just don't know what value that this adds. I mean, had I been advising her, had she asked me, I would have told her to write a different book, a book that my daughter, your daughters, and their generation really needs. And that is a full-throated description of how she broke that glass ceiling, many of the challenges that I saw her face in the White House, and how she overcame it to really make groundbreaking, or I should say record-breaking investments in the border, taking on defending our rights, from voting rights to reproductive rights, to really engaging and bringing a new set of coalition to the table to support policies as big as infrastructure and guns that they passed. I mean, she has a tremendous record, and I just would have wished that she would have written a book that really elevated that and contrasted what America under Biden and Harris, where she wanted to take America, and where we are right now.
Rick, it's such a fascinating point that Ashley is making right now. And I have to tell you, I've spoken to a number of Democrats, one just last night, telling me, boy, this book lacks introspection in terms of what she could have done a little bit differently in this campaign. Here is how Pete Buttigieg responded to the excerpt in the book where she talks about making a determination about whether to choose him as her running mate. Secretary Buttigieg says to Politico, quote, "I was surprised when I read that. I just believe in giving Americans more credit." Governor Shapiro said to Stephen A. Smith, she's going to have to answer to how she was in the room and yet never said anything publicly, meaning about President Biden's capacity to serve. And we'll have more reaction from Governor Shapiro on Sunday. Is this a recipe for running again in 2028? Rick, campaigns.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think there was an opportunity for her to write another book. Obviously, I haven't read the book. But speaking of introspection, I think the biggest mistake that Kamala Harris made during her campaign was a single quote in which sort of encapsulated the whole campaign, which is, would you do anything different than President Biden? And she said she couldn't think of anything different. And I think really that was it. I think people wanted to move on from Joe Biden. They didn't agree with his policies. I'm not sure they agree with hers. There was a tone deafness to the campaign. It had an appeal to the elite and left behind the working class. And that's the problem the Democrats are going to have to face up to. They walked away from the working class. President Trump grabbed them, and now they're without the working class. And it's going to be up to the Democrats to somehow win them back. Maybe they can, but right now they belong to the president.
Ashley, to that question of one of the things you need in order to run a successful campaign is to have the support of the quote unquote base of the Democratic Party. And all these people, whether you're talking about Secretary Buttigieg, whether you're talking about Governor Shapiro, boy, they rallied around her in 2024. She clearly in this book leaves the door open to something, to the possibility of potentially running again or to having some type of political future. But from a practical standpoint, Ashley, how challenging would that be? Will these people, if she were to say, hey, I'm running again, would they be able to back her?
Yeah, I mean, the unfortunate thing is that all of the folks that you just laid out and that she talks about in the book were really good soldiers. I mean, they were out there soldiering to try to win this election. So it's unfortunate to hear how she's been positioning them in this particular book. But, she's got, every opportunity to really see this and deliver this book from her own perspective. But I think what Governor Shapiro said is really, if I had to identify a vulnerability for her, it is that one going forward. What did she know when she knew it? I mean, you've got a Department of Justice and a committee on Capitol Hill that's deposing former Biden staffers as we speak about this particular issue. And I just found it interesting that as a current attorney and former attorney general, that she would even step sort of into that realm. And, again, there were so many other things I think she could have talked about, her 4 years in that office and breaking that glass ceiling, rather than getting into sort of what feels very much like Page Six sort of gossipy stuff.
Rick, just finally, a lot of these people who she mentions in her book, of course, they are people who are getting a lot of buzz as being potential candidates in 2028 themselves. Correct. Could that be part of the strategy here, trying to start? It feels like the primary may have already started. I mean, I don't want to get ahead of the process, but.
Well, look, you're right. All those people that she mentioned, they are going to run for president. There's no doubt in my mind. I think the Democratic Party, and I'm not a Democrat, so I shouldn't speak for them, but I think they've turned the page on Kamala Harris. I don't think she will be the nominee if she runs. I just don't think they're going to go back there.
All right, guys, fantastic conversation. A lot to unpack on this Friday afternoon. Ashley and Rick, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Coming up after the break, meet the veteran Democratic operative who says it is time for the party to regroup and try to take on some of the most influential progressive organizations in politics. We will talk to him. It's only here on Meet the Press Now. Stay with us. Welcome back as Democrats debate all aspects of the party's strategy and messaging ahead of next year's midterms. One veteran operative with deep ties to the party is calling for a new way of doing business. Adam Gentleson, who has worked for everyone from the late Senator Harry Reid to John Kerry and most recently served as chief of staff to Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman, has launched a new group. It's called Searchlight Institute, aimed at refocusing Democratic messaging and straying away from more progressive talking points and issues. And joining me now to discuss this new group is Adam Gentleson, the founder of that group. Thank you so much, Adam, for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Kristen. It's great to be here.
Well, it's great to have you here, Adam. Let me just start with the big question. Why did you want to start this group? Why do you think it's time for a new path forward?
That's a great question. And, the reason is that for too long, Democrats have been locked into a culture of rigidity and orthodoxy that I think has been very damaging to the party. And I think the key thing here is that what we at Searchlight are advocating for is not moving right, left, or center. It is to have a mix of policy positions that reflects the true complexity of the American people. And for about 10 years, you've had the growth of this multi-billion-dollar influence industry whose primary goal has been to keep Democrats in adherence to a very rigid liberal orthodox views. And that is why Democrats have lost the ability to compete in red states, in purple states, and swing states. When I was working in the Senate in 2009, Democrats had 60 Senate seats. We had both Senate seats in Arkansas, both Senate seats in West Virginia, a seat in states like Louisiana, Nebraska, and Indiana. And we've lost our ability to compete in those states because we've become too rigid as a party. So what we are trying to do is break open that culture of rigidity and get Democrats to think big and to think creatively and to cross ideological boundaries once again.
Well, let's talk about what that means in practical terms based on what I've read, and I want your take. Part of what you were saying is we need to focus less on issues like LGBTQ rights, climate change. Is that accurate? Is that an accurate description of part of your strategy?
Not exactly, because I think what we would advocate for is for Democrats to be clear about where the American people stand. And we do believe that leadership is important. We are not going to tell Democrats to only take positions that poll well or only take positions that are already popular. We think leadership is important. And so what we think is that Democrats believe very strongly that they want to lead out on an issue such as trans rights or climate change. They should absolutely do that, and we will support them in doing so. But what we want them to know is where they stand with the American people. And for too long, we have created an information culture that has basically lied to Democrats with numbers and caused them to believe that all of these issues are already popular with the American people. And what we believe is we need to sort of bring some hygiene back to this information culture and help people understand where the American people actually stand. So that if there are core issues where Democrats want to lead out on because it's very important to them or to the constituencies that they represent, then by all means they should do so. And Searchlight will be right there supporting them. But what we've done is we've gotten out in front of the public opinion, not just on 1 or 2 or 3 issues, but on 5 to 10 issues. And that is a big part of why Democrats have come to find themselves out of power as we have today.
What is the reaction that you're getting so far, Adam? Have you gotten any backlash to this strategy where you're basically saying, let's be practical moving forward? Let's look at the big picture. Are you bracing for backlash?
Oh, we've gotten some, and we knew we would. And that's, I think what we're trying to do here is to introduce a culture where we go back to saying the things that we believe out loud in public and let the chips fall where they may. I think we've had a culture that has sort of tried to suppress people from saying things that they truly believe. I think there are very few candidates out there who believe every single left-wing position on every issue, but they felt like they've had to say it. And so, the reaction is part of what we are going for here. We think if we were not causing some people to get upset, we wouldn't be doing our jobs right. So we have had it. We're not daunted by it. We think that's part of a signal that we're doing our jobs right. But all we can do is stay committed to our core commitments of telling the truth, of being transparent, and putting information out there that we believe to be true. And that's what we're going to do.
Adam, I wonder if you can take us inside your time frame for this. Is this something that do you think your group can make real inroads ahead of the midterms, or are you looking more at the next presidential election?
I think we can make an impact right away. I think we already have. We launched on Wednesday, and we've already made a big reaction. I'm here talking to you, and we are I think in the minds of a lot of folks already. And we are going to be putting out a high volume of polling data, a high volume of creative, unorthodox issues starting right now. And I think we will have a lot of information out there that will be useful to people in the midterms, but in particular looking towards, building towards a synthesis of a comprehensive agenda in 2027 and 2028.
Adam, I do want to ask you about your former boss, Senator John Fetterman. Last year, you raised concerns about his mental health as he continued to recover from the stroke he suffered during his campaign. He called it a, quote, hit piece. I wonder how tough of a decision it was for you to leave his office.
It was really hard. And I think I still feel a tremendous amount of compassion towards him. I think that ultimately I felt compelled to say the truth about what I believe is a very dangerous situation and condition. And that's, pretty much all I have to say about that. I wish him all the best. But I think the truth is the truth. And it's really important for the people of Pennsylvania and the American people in general to know the truth.
Well, I do want to ask you, and this kind of fits into the broader question about strategy moving forward. Senator Fetterman just made some comments that got a lot of attention, basically saying that he does not think that President Trump should be described as an autocrat. He says if you actually compare him to an actual autocrat, that is not just that. He has a back and forth, and he says, I just don't agree with many of the things with President Trump, but that does not make him an autocrat. Do you agree with that message from Senator Fetterman, or do you side and would you advocate for a strategy that includes using words like autocracy to describe what's happening right now?
I think Senator Fetterman is free to describe things the way he wants to. I think Democrats should speak their mind very clearly. I think the things that President Trump have unequivocally and clearly raised serious questions about the rule of law and the consolidation of power in the executive beyond what we have seen in many, many years and potentially ever in the presidency here in America. So I think that it is important not to downplay those concerns, even as we debate over the use of language. But I think what Senator Fetterman is doing is really sort of zeroing in on language and semantic concerns that I think are probably not core to the real issues at stake here.
And just big picture, Adam, as you look towards the midterms, as you look towards the next presidential election, the big divide in the Democratic Party, is it time for Democrats to fight fire with fire? How do you see this battle playing out?
I think it is absolutely time for Democrats to fight. I think one of the mistaken assumptions we've been working on for about 10 years now is that fight has to come by moving far to the left across a range of issues. And I think you're even seeing a recognition of that from folks on the left. I think the way to win this fight that we are pitted in, which I think is the stakes could not be higher, is to build as big and broad a coalition as we possibly can to develop strategies that will allow Democrats to once again win in those kinds of states that we used to represent as recently as the Obama administration. That is the way to overcome the structural forces that we face today. But that has to be about building a big tent. And there is no contradiction between a big tent strategy and a strategy that's dedicated to fighting. In fact, I would argue that those advocating for a big tent strategy, for those like us who are advocating that trade-offs are a real and necessary part of politics, we are the ones who are going to lead us to a strategy that enables us to beat back these dangerous forces that are threatening our democracy.
All right, Adam Gentleson, so fantastic to have you today. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it. And coming up next, a key vaccine advisory panel just voted against recommending the COVID-19 vaccine for all ages as it eyes a potential overhaul of childhood vaccinations in America. We're live at the CDC. Stay with us on Meet the Press now. Welcome back. This second day of a critical two-day meeting of the CDC's Vaccine Advisory Panel has now wrapped up. The panel considered recommendations that will have major implications on both vaccine policy and ability. Moments ago, advisors voted for recommendations that take a more restrictive approach to the COVID-19 vaccine. That meeting comes after Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. fired all 17 experts on the panel and replaced them with his own picks, including some vaccine skeptics. Inside the room, it has been tense and at times chaotic as members engaged in heated discussion, with one member even accusing the committee's chair of unfairly muting his microphone. Joining me now is NBC News national correspondent Aaron Gilchrist. Aaron, bring us up to speed. What's the very latest from today?
Well, Kristen, I think if you look at the totality of the last 2 days, there weren't any drastic changes to the recommendations about the vaccine schedule for children or adults in this country. I think that's sort of the top headline here. Today, there was some confusion, really, this morning that spilled over from yesterday about the hepatitis B vaccine in particular. That was a vaccine, or is a vaccine, that right now is recommended for all newborns, for children as soon as they're born, to get. And the vote this morning was supposed to be about changing that to a later point in life for children. And ultimately, after some back and forth and disagreement about access issues and whether the vaccines were really as safe as all the science currently indicates they are, ultimately they decided, based on a motion from one of the doctors
Aaron,
on the panel,
I hate to interrupt
that
you.
vote indefinitely.
Aaron, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but President Trump is taking questions right now, so thank you for that intro, that information. Let's go to the White House and listen to President Trump.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.